quite possibly one of the most iconic missions of all time. This was the big twist of Halo CE, the big reveal, the level where a terrifying new foe was introduced, the Flood, and it came completely out of nowhere. This is honestly one of the coolest, most well-designed levels in any video game, and I still use it as the gold standard for how you should do a horrifying buildup like this. Now, as a speedrunner, I often find myself digging through the game's scripts. There's no better way to understand how a game works than digging through its code, and I consider it just another part of going fast. So one day, as I was doing some light reading, I discovered that there's actually a treasure trove of cut content that still exists in the game's code. All I had to do was flip it back on and reload the map, and I was honestly blown away by what I found. So that's what this video is all about, the cut and unfinished ideas left behind by the developers. Some were as simple as flipping a switch, others took a bit of work on my part to get fully working. And as always, if you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe. You all blew me away with the response to the last video. I appreciate it a lot, and it hasn't gone unnoticed. Now, without further ado, I hope you all enjoy this rather unique trip back to 343 Guilty Spark. I'm going to kick this video off with what's probably the most memorable part of the whole swamp section, at least for me. These are the Bigfoot sightings. You know, those little encounters where you suddenly see some friendly blips on your radar, but if you actually follow them closely, you can just barely make out the flood form before they disappear. Yeah, the devs actually referred to these as Bigfoot sightings in the game's code. There's normally 5 in total. There's one at the base of the log that you can see when you pass the down spirit dropship. The next is up in the cliffs when you walk under the right wing of that same dropship. You can just barely catch a glimpse of them. The third is at the base of the tree, which spawns another flood running along the cliffs to the right. The fourth is also on that tree and spawns a couple forms up in the cliff and another that you can see on the other side. The final is halfway across the tree, which spawns another form up in the cliffs to your right and one in the swamp to your left. Did you know there's actually 4 more of these unused Bigfoot sightings? The code for them still exists in the game's data, they were just deactivated. There's one that will spawn right away, the second you step off the Pelican dropship. It's scripted to run all the way past the down spirit dropship before finally despawning. If you're quick enough, you can just barely catch a glimpse of it as it runs away. The second unused sighting is up in these cliffs. It's actually really short and easy to miss, and I actually thought it was broken at first. From the start of the level, you need to make your way through the swamp along this path. Once at this boulder, if you look up, you'll see him running in the cliffs up above. He's scripted to run along the edge for a short period before finally disappearing, almost like you're being watched. Now, the third and fourth unused sightings are actually a bit convoluted to get. They're scripted almost like they were originally intended to be a hidden Easter egg. These flood will only spawn in when you're standing in a very specific spot and you look in their direction. From the start, turn to the left and make your way past this hill. Once you arrive at these 2 trees with a rock over to the right, move to the left tree and look to your left. And there goes the first sighting, running through the swamp. The next you can see by instead going over to the right tree and looking over to the right. And there goes the other one. It's pretty cool, and I imagine this would have been a hard one to find if it had been left in the game. Now, a question arises. Why were these 4 cut? Well, I do have a bit of a theory about that. The original 5 that we actually see in the final game are credited to the developer Tyson Green in the code. You can see them right here under Tyson's Shiznat, and also referenced over here under Kill Tyson's Crap. Well, it's as good a function name as any other, I suppose. Now, I'm just speculating here, but maybe these 4 unused sightings were the original proof of concept, the initial effort that eventually led to the development of the 5 we see in the final game. The scripts that handle these unused sightings are not actually located under Tyson's Shiznat. Maybe these extra sightings were the devs just playing around with this creepy Bigfoot sighting idea. Maybe they thought, hey, this is actually really cool, and it would eventually fall on Tyson to fully flesh it out and make it a reality. Or they just didn't like these ones. That's a possibility too, I guess. Anyway, let's move on to our next bit. You all remember when you first made it to the Forerunner structure at the end of the swamp section? You see an explosion and Covenant fleeing from some assault rifle fire coming from inside. But when you make your way over, it's empty. By the way, if you didn't know, that assault rifle fire, it's not Flood. They're literally just floating assault rifles that shoot. They were specifically made for this level, and it's actually a really clever way to do this. The AI of Halo Combat Evolved involved was one of the best of its time. It's dynamic and smart. It's part of what makes the game so good. The Flood AI especially is unique in that they utilize something called swarm mechanics. They just try to overwhelm you with numbers, running headfirst directly at their targets. And that's exactly why this floating AR solution was so ingenious. You don't want the Flood to rush out of the structure and spoil the upcoming surprise. For this scene to work, you need it to be completely static, without any of the randomness that Flood AI are especially bound to give you. In this particular section, there's originally 3 of these floating ARs that shoot at the Covenant from inside the structure. There are, however, 2 more unused rifles that spawn outside. There's one behind this bush right out front, and another up on this hill overlooking it. Makes for a very chaotic looking scene the first time you see it. And yet still, these aren't the only ones present on this map. There's actually 5 other unused encounters that feature these floating rifles that were ultimately cut from the final game. The first are right at the very start during the opening cutscene. As the Covenant are fleeing, you'll see assault rifle fire coming in from behind them, right at the top of this ridge. These same assault rifles make another appearance almost immediately after. When you move a bit forward and you see this scripted explosion, there they are, cutting through the thick fog, shooting at the squad of fleeing Covenant up ahead. They shoot for a little bit, then stop, and then one more starts up again before finally silence. Pretty cool. Moving further along in the swamp, there's some more that start shooting at you at the fallen log. What's cool about these ones is they draw your attention to the exact places where you'll see the Flood as part of that Bigfoot sighting I mentioned earlier, so it becomes almost impossible to miss. The final 2 floating rifle encounters are inside the Forerunner structure, and they completely change the first 2 rooms. Let's talk about the very first room when you first come down the lift. Normally, you'll see a large group of Covenant standing guard in front of this door. This wasn't always how it was going to play out, however. First, there's an unused piece of music that would play right around when you reach the bottom. Second, that big group of Covenant replaced with terrified grunts running away from deeper within the facility. What are they running from? Well, 4 more references to floating assault rifles shooting at those very grunts as they run towards the lift. Here it is, played out in full. It's a pretty cool sequence of events. Now let's talk about the very next room, this big bay area. Normally, you'd have another encounter with Covenant standing guard trying to prevent you from going any further. There's some jackals up top with some grunts down below. After a short period of time, some more jackals will emerge from the door on the far side. Same as the prior room though, this wasn't always how it was going to go. That door on the far side, you'll instead see the Covenant fleeing from it. And on the other side of that door lie more references to 2 more of these floating ARs. They'll shoot out of the open door for a short period of time, then suddenly stop, with the door ominously closing behind them. It's another cool sequence of events. Here it is, played out in full. Also, one more thing, I don't think this box was here before they changed up this section. Just a hunch. Now, I'm guessing the reason all these extra AR encounters were cut was just to not overdo it. There's literally 6 of these scenarios, including the one that's actually in the game. That's quite a few. The first time, it's a shock, like something's not quite right. By the 6th though, it turns gimmicky and it just doesn't hit the same way. The devs probably realized this, picked their favorite of the 6, and just rolled with it. Alright, now let's move on to our next bit of cut content, the one that inspired this whole video to begin with. After making your way further into the mysterious Forerunner structure, you'll eventually come across a Marine that has just completely lost it.
Stay back! Stay back! You're not turning me into one of those things!
He's gone crazy, shooting at anything that moves, including Chief, all while rambling about strange things that took out the whole squad, including Captain Keyes. The usual course of action is to either put him out of his misery or just walk away and leave him to his own devices. But well, that's not all that was going to happen if you choose to walk away. If you've watched the excellent developer commentary, you might recall Joe and Marty talking about some of their other ideas here.
Now, the original plan for Crazy Marine was he was actually going to, when you remember, Marty, we had a fight, not a fight about this, we don't ever fight, but
never fight.
Crazy Marine was supposed to stay alive, and then when you walked however many world units away from him, and we checked, you know, to see that you weren't looking, we were just gonna have this big bang, right? And you would come back and you'd be dead on the floor.
No, I was fine with that. The thing I didn't ever want you to see him kill himself. But I also didn't want all of his lines to be said all in a row.
Exactly.
They were supposed to be said at different times, but instead, Jamie said, boring. Just have them all set in the same time.
Right.
So, if you didn't quite catch that, one of the original ideas was if the player walked far enough away, you'd hear a loud bang and come back to the crazy Marine dead on the floor. The implication being quite clear. Marty was rather explicit about never allowing the player to see this happen. It had to be off screen. Likely because it's a bit too extreme, especially by 2001 standards. There are some remnants though that still exist in the game's code pointing to this very idea the devs were talking about. The first, a cut music line that plays right when you enter the room. And the next is an unused death animation. It takes place right at the very end once he's finished his ramblings. You don't even need to walk away to see it. I'm guessing they just didn't get around to scripting it properly before they decided to cut it. It happens pretty quick, and the animation isn't very polished, probably because it was supposed to happen off screen. What this does confirm though is that what the devs were saying in the commentary was true. This really was a much darker direction they were considering for this Marine during development. And now we move on to that iconic cutscene. You know the one, where all the tension and buildup finally pays off with the reveal of the parasite, the Flood, the thing that changes everything. I'll let the devs take it away. They explain it much better than I ever could.
Notice how the music takes you down this hallway. Of course, I'm going as slow as I possibly can.
Notice how Marty's exactly running everywhere perfectly. The idea that knowing something horrible happened and going into the very room where it happened,
Yes.
but not knowing that's where it happened until you listen to the video.
See, that's what's cool about this.
Yeah.
All right, I have a few cool things to show in this reveal sequence. The first is towards the beginning of the cutscene. When Chief opens the door, the cutscene zooms in on the Marine falling into Chief's arms. However, there's a different, unused shot of this Marine that instead has the camera pan back and show Chief stumbling as he catches him. It's pretty neat, showing a completely different angle to this. I think they wanted some more oomph to it though, so they wound up switching it over to the camera zoom in order to up the jump scare factor. The next is some funny objects during the reveal cutscene. Joe talks about it a little in the dev commentary.
And then I think Chris Barrett put that bush there right at the very end, or not to blame Chris if he didn't do it, but like the magic bush that was never there before when I made all the playbacks.
No, let's blame Chris. That's more fun.
Yes.
Well, this bush isn't the only thing that got in the way. You might remember this rock here next to the bush that's suspiciously missing from the cutscene. They had to specifically remove it before kicking off the cutscene because it messes with the pathing a little bit. Not only does Jenkins get caught on it, but so does another Marine off screen, which causes an unintended side effect where he bonks on another Marine. So naturally, in the final build, they got rid of the rock. And finally, there's some unused infection forms in the reveal room. After the cutscene finishes, there exists some unused spawns in these center platforms, right below the glass. They swarm up at you, but are unable to break through the glass, so they just bang up against it. It's a cool bit of room ambience that sets up how these infection forms are going to act, just single-mindedly trying to swarm you. By the way, this took a bit of work on my part to get it to function correctly. The way this room normally goes is after a short period of time, waves of infection forms start busting down the containment doors. Each of these waves is tied to an enemy counter. The next wave won't start until you kill enough infection forms, or you just wait a really long time. When I first added these center infection forms back in, they were tied to this very enemy count, but they're stuck under the glass. So there'd be this ridiculously long wait time between each wave, which, it kind of kills the mood and is why I'm guessing they cut these. Okay, moving on to after the big reveal, we start making our way out of the Forerunner structure, except now it's completely overrun with Flood. Heading back out into the second bay area, there were originally a whole lot more Flood that were going to be packed into this room, and I mean a lot more. Specifically, a bunch of infection forms right above the door that drop down and ambush you as you make your way out. There's also quite a few more Flood combat forms on the second level that were going to jump down and ambush some unlucky Covenant down below. That's not all though. Remember the doors leading to where we found the crazy Marine earlier? Well, in the base game, these two doors are usually busted and you can't actually go through them. But this wasn't always the case. There's some more unused spawns that were going to rush out of the bottom door as part of the ambush. And by the way, just look at the ridiculous amount of enemies in this area. I can only imagine the slideshow this would be on the original Xbox. What these extra spawns confirm though is that originally we were going to be able to head back into the the room with the crazy marine. Going back in there, there's some more flood spawns that appear here too, but there's more. Remember in the cutscene, those dead elites? Well, if you let the reveal cutscene play out to at least this point, you'll actually see those elites in here as well. The cutscene never cleans them up, and I was honestly surprised at just how detailed they were, despite only being used for a short cutscene segment. And like those floating ARs I mentioned earlier, these elites were custom made specifically for this level. This is the only place you'll ever get to see them in the base game. Okay, after making our way back and progressing through the now unlocked door in that second bay area, we'll happen across another lift that will finally take us back to the surface and... oh no. Alright, making our way deeper into the facility. Normally, you might remember a couple Marines fleeing through a door on the far side with some flood rushing out shortly after. These Marines don't last too long. Fun fact, they actually die in one hit. The scripts, they literally set their vitality to 0, so if anything so much as touches them, they're dead. Now, there is some more unused code here, and to be honest, I'm really not sure why they cut this one out because it's really cool. Here's what was going to happen instead. The Marines rush through the open door on the far side, quickly closing and locking it behind them. Not that it matters, they are quickly taken out by the flood already present in this room. But notice what happens to that locked door behind them. You see exactly what they were running from, and they won't be stopped by some weak little door. The only explanation I have for why this sequence was cut is that the flood's pathing can sometimes break and they won't fully charge through the now busted down door. But honestly, I really wish they left this one in. It's cool and shows exactly what the flood are capable of, and it's little touches like this that are always the most memorable, at least for me. And that's really about it for the juicy stuff. I do want to make a short segue into a couple lift portions. These aren't actually cut content, but they're really cool, so I wanted to point them out. The first is the broken lift. After the flood reveal, you're supposed to make your way through this now unlocked door in that second room, but you don't have to. You can instead make your way back to that first lift, the one we used to get down here. Upon entering the room for the second time, you'll be attacked by yet another group of flood, and if you look up, you'll very quickly notice something is very wrong with this lift. And when you try to call it back down, disaster. This is such a cool Easter egg that I didn't even know existed for the longest time. I do wonder if at one point in development, this broken lift sequence was going to be a required thing before continuing onwards. But I imagine it would have resulted in way too many players getting lost, so it just became an Easter egg instead. Now, this next lift, maybe you don't know about. It's a little out of the way and requires some finesse to get to. After making it to this bay area, which you can find after the fleeing Marine segment, you can make your way up to this second floor. Once you enter this room, move over to this spot and do a grenade jump. Timing it just right will actually put you inside the second floor. Now all you have to do is jump again, and then you can make your way through this unlocked door at the other end. And what you'll find inside is a hidden lift. It's completely busted with just some flood spawns mingling about. There's nothing at either end, up or down, so I don't believe this lift was ever really meant to go anywhere. There also wasn't any cut content surrounding it that I could find, but it's a neat Easter egg that I wanted to show in case you haven't seen it. And the rest of the cut content was a little mean, to put it mildly. Mostly a bunch of unused spawns that really fill up the whole facility with just swarms of flood. It was definitely a lot more difficult to get through some of these sections on Legendary. The most ridiculous of them all was this one unused script called AI magically see players in that second swamp portion. This is the part where you finally escape the facility and happen upon a squad of Marines. As the script name implies, all flood in this first section of the swamp know where you are at all times. Magically, of course. Definitely makes this section feel a lot more hectic, especially once you consider that the flood respawn infinitely. One other thing I got a kick out of in this section is these Marines are literally called lift meat in the scripts. Yes, I'm serious. And I mean, yeah, they're really not that effective against the flood. They're really just there to soak up some damage. Bungie always had a pretty good sense of humor with this stuff. Now, you're probably wondering about the final cutscene, and yes, I do have one last piece of cut content to show you. Another unused animation, this one being a little jankier than the others. After conversing with Spark, that big blue light bulb, he will teleport Chief away to the library in order to retrieve the activation index. And we all remember how that part went. Anyway, there's this one unused animation where Chief stumbles forward while he's teleporting away. It's a bit funny, he just stumbles forward and then shrinks back. Makes sense why they decided to go in a different direction. And that's really all I have to show you. I hope you all enjoyed this small look into what what could have been for 343 Guilty Spark. It's one thing to hear about all the different possibilities the devs had in mind, but it's entirely another thing to see it all in action. It was interesting just going through the game's data and piecing it all together. I had a blast going through all of it, and I still can't believe how much was left behind. It really blew my mind, and I hope this gives a fresh and unique perspective on what is quite possibly one of the greatest levels of all time. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.